On a desolate back road, an elderly black woman wearing a stately emerald dress stood next to her stranded automobile. Gleaming with heat, she had phoned for a tow, anticipating nothing more than a typical nuisance. But destiny had other ideas. Cicadas were buzzing their endless tune. Dust clung to the hem of her dress as a police vehicle screamed to an HD. Deputy Malik blinked, her fingers tightening around the handle of her purse, her spine, though stooped with age, remaining rigid with defiance as Shane Wexler, a lean white man with cropped hair and an eager smirk, leaped out with his gun drawn and his voice slicing through the thick, humid air. "Hands up," stepped away from the car. "Excuse me." Wexler's lip tightened and she said, "Don't be stupid, this car isn't yours." Mika took a deep breath and steadied herself. At 72, she had already experienced there have been men like him for decades who have shown mistrust before justification, who have seen her complexion and blamed her, but their animosity has never been this blatantly uncivilized. "This is my vehicle. If you check my registration, you'll see don't move," she stated in a calm, measured manner. Something darker than duty caused Wexler's pupils to enlarge as his finger jerked on the trigger. Malik's hands shook as she raised them, but her pulse stayed steady. "Outward palms, deputy, you're making a mistake," but when it was intentional, it wasn't a mistake. He yanked her arms behind her, the handcuffs snapping so tight around her thin wrists that she felt skin break and warm blood trickle down. "You people always think you're so damn clever," Wexler muttered under his breath, his voice low enough that only she could hear him. The slur that followed was quieter still, but a blade slipped between her ribs. Wexler charged forward, slamming her frail body against the hot metal of the car door. She had heard it whispered in the backroom meetings and in the halls of power where she had battled to lead Birchwood Parish toward justice. But here in the dust and silence of the backroads, there was no podium to stand behind, no press to bear witness, just her Wexler and the oppressive weight of a nation that never really allowed her to belong. The pain was deeper than the sun's scorching steel against her cheek. "What is your current situation, Wexler?" "You have a suspect in custody," he continued, and his voice dripped with triumph. "Car theft defying arrest." When Malik said the sentence that separated survival from a body bag, his mouth went dry. A moment the cruiser came slowly rolling to a stop. Two more officers emerged, one with a bulging stomach over his belt and the other with broad shoulders and tight sleeves over muscular arms. Their mirrored sunglasses reflected her slouched figure back at her. "Darn it. I thought you mentioned you had a suspicion, but Shane, the older one, just looked like an elderly woman with a hand resting on his holster." Wexler snarled, "She's not just some old lady, Sid." Before the match, there was a brief moment of doubt between the third officer, Sheck a thief, and the woman with the broad shoulders leaned slightly, examining her face. "Wait, isn't she the newswoman?" Her name was unclear but recognized, and it hung in the air.
"Like gunpowder." "I don't care who she thinks she is." Wexler's jaw twitched as he turned to the other voice and growled, "Are you supporting me?" Sid shrugged and said, "You know how it is if it's her." In any case, the broad one paused for a half-second more before nodding. "Yeah, let's do it." She crumpled onto the gravel road as a boot struck the back of her knee and her shoulder. Wexler dug his knee into her spine, his breath hot and rancid against her ear, and suddenly the weight of her title and decades of service meant nothing. The second kick landed in her ribs, the third hit her thigh, the fourth she lost count of, and then somewhere in the haze of agony she heard a new voice. "The hell is this?" The blows stopped through her swelling. In her vision, she noticed an elderly man standing at the road's edge. He was wiry and his work clothes were colored from dirt and sweat. "Miss Malika," his voice faltered, "Sweet Jesus," and then the broad officer's face showed recognition as it crept up from his clamped jaw to his wide eyes. She was the governor, and even Wexler's breathing slowed as his hold on her arms relaxed. A farmer named Jacob Landry, who had previously waited in line at one of her town halls, asked her whether she would fight for guys like him. I heard her say, "Yes," and her voice grew stronger. "She then marched with King and you got her in the dirt like some common criminal." The broad one shifted uneasily, and Sid's expression wavered with something unreadable, but Wexler doubled on and said, "She's a liar." His voice cracked. "Sheck, just another Jacob cut him off that right then, so why is her name on every damn sign from here to the Capitol?" More stillness. Malika sensed a change in the atmosphere, a wave of conviction, and then a loud noise. This time, a black SUV, with doors flying out before the automobile had even stopped traveling. Lena Rojo, her chief of staff, jumped out. "Get your hands off her," without hesitation or second guessing. There was fury in every line of her face. More cars came after. The world watched as history tipped on its axis. The game had shifted, state troopers, aides, press cameras, flashing microphones, pressed forward voices shouting over one another, and the hum of live broadcasts filled the hot Louisiana air. Sid took a slow step back, his hands raised in surrender, and the broad officer turned away, muttering something under his breath. However, Wexler remained where he was and she saw it. At that very moment, he realized that he had lost not the bruises, the blood drying on her lips, the rage on Lena's face, or the disgust creeping into Sid's slouched shoulders, but Jacob Landry, a white farmer with dirt under his nails, was standing between her and the boot that had been pressing down on her neck. Wexler realized what Malik had always known. True power wasn't in the badge, but in the people who refused to be silenced. The governor of Louisiana's bloodied but unbroken gaze was fixed on Wexler for a long, suffocating moment as she pushed herself upright, the weight of her years pressing down heavier than ever, but she stood, and the cameras captured it all. She said, "This is far from over," and for the first time he looked afraid. However, Mika wasn't finished. She turned to the press, wiping the blood from her mouth with the back of her hand. The red smeared across her skin like war paint. Let the world see what happens when those in positions of power believe they are above the law. Let them see the bruises, the violence, the fear, and the fear they attempt to weaponize against us, and then let them watch as we reclaim what is rightfully ours. Wexler winced in spite of himself. "You wanted to bury me," she whispered softly enough for only he to hear, "but you forgot one thing about the roots of this land." She smiled, and then slowly and deliberately they always rise. She turned to walk toward Lena and the people in the direction of the movement that had been waiting for her to rise in order to find the spark that would start the fire. The chant spread like a storm front, "Justice, justice, justice," as the crowd's voices screamed. It was a war cry, not simply a word, and the press was suddenly unable to keep them in check. There weren't enough state troopers to stop them. The air vibrated with something unstoppable as the barricades faltered. Wexler took a step back, his gaze darting to the officers on his side. His control and power were slipping through his fingers like sand when a distant phone sounded, followed by another aide's. Feverishly whispering into their earpieces, they were moving the courthouse doors open, and Malika knew they were coming in for the records, the files, the proof of every deal, every rigged contract, every back row favor that had built Wexler's empire. Senators were phoning donors, scrambling the system, and trying to right itself before it completely collapsed. But it was too late because people had already seen her. Lena was by her side now, holding her hand to steady her, and Malik turned to look back one last time at the man who had attempted to destroy her. She told him to run, and this time Wexler didn't hesitate. He turned and pushed past his own men, pushing his way toward the black SUV waiting at the curb. The door slammed, the tires screeched, and the crowd roared. Malik closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of it all, the bruises, the fear, the years of fighting, and the clawing for every inch of progress. Then she took a breath and moved forward, realizing that this wasn't the end, but rather just the beginning.